share my. Welcome, everyone. We're going to just give it a minute for people to join the call, and then we'll get started. Okay, why don't I get started? Because we've got an amazing group of people here today and lots of things to talk about. Yeah, we'll get going here. My name is Rebecca Penn, and I'm an uninvited white settler in Mi'kma'ki, the area of Canada that is colonially known as Nova Scotia. It is the contemporary, ongoing, unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I work for London Intercommunity Health Centre, and I'm the project manager for the National Safer Supply Community of Practice. I'd like to start off by acknowledging colonialism in the past and the present. So we come together today from different places across Turtle Island, where people who live on treaty lands and unceded territory. We work in a sector whose goal is to address social harms, and we must recognize that the production of these harms comes from the history of colonialism and its enduring practices, institutions, and ways of thinking. Colonialism is with us today, and we must commit to working in ways that reshape these institutions and practices, repair harms, prevent future harms, and to work towards a more inclusive and just future. I also want to acknowledge that we're talking about substance use and harm reduction and drug policies, and acknowledge that the drug policies that we have today disproportionately impact members of the Black, African, Caribbean communities and Indigenous communities and other groups. So we need to be thinking about equity and justice when we have these conversations. So the National Safer Supply Community of Practice, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're funded by Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program, and our mandate is to support the scale of the safer supply programs across Canada. We do that through capacity building and knowledge exchange. We have now over 1,400 members from across the country. It's a very interdisciplinary group. We have an active group of clinicians, healthcare providers, people who use drugs, researchers, people from policy and knowledge exchange. It's quite an amazing community. We have a website where you can find all of our resources and information about us and how to join the community of practice. So welcome. We are recording this event and you will be able to share this. We'll be putting it on our website. You'll find it up there by tomorrow. For those of you who are experiencing any technical difficulties, honestly, the simplest way to deal with them typically is to log off and log back on. We do have closed captioning available. You'll see that on the bottom of your screen. Typically, I think that's where most people will find it. I invite you to use the question and answer box if you have questions for our panelists today. We will get to them in the latter part of our conversation. Also, just want to tell you that we do have a certificate of attendance available about halfway through. We'll drop the link for a certificate in the chat box. Just follow that link and fill out the form there and you'll get a certificate of attendance in your email. Very quickly, we have a few things coming up. This webinar is a hot topic webinar. We have two types of webinars, hot topic webinars and research spotlight webinars. We don't have any other hot topic webinars happening over the course of the summer because there's so much research in safer supply happening. And so we have a number of research spotlight webinars happening over the course of the summer. So our first is on July 13th. We've got Dr. Jane Buxton, Jessica Xavier, and Phoenix Beck-McGreevy and Jenny McDougall presenting substance use patterns and safer supply preferences amongst people who use drugs in BC. Then on July 24th, you can join Dr. Carol Strike, Dr. Adrian Guda, and Rose Schmidt in their report launch. It's on a study of safer opioid supply programs in Ontario. And then in August, Samara Mayer and Jules Chapman are presenting on women's experiences in injectable opioid agonist treatment programs in Vancouver. And that's Monday, August 21st. And for more information about what we do, check out our website. And with that, I'm so happy to pass it over to the very capable hands of Garth Mullins. Garth, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you all so much.
Hey, thanks, Rebecca. I'm Garth Mullins. I'm going to be your host for the next hour and a half, I guess. And people often ask me to host things because I host a podcast called Crackdown. It's made by drug users. It's about the drug war. And it's based on our organizing here in Coast Salish territory, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh in Vancouver. Probably an associated reason is because I have done opioids mostly every day of my adult life, and I'm in middle age now. I'm getting deep into middle age now, and I can tell you I don't like it. But I've done mostly heroin, and now mostly I'm on methadone. But I do chip, and I try to chip safe. But my role as an organizer is really what puts me in front of you today, not just as an opioid connoisseur and an old school dope fiend. We have a great panel coming up. I'll tell you, Leslie McBain, co-founder of Moms Stop the Harm. You always got to listen to the moms. That's what my mom always told me anyway. We got Anjay Selinsky, Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs, last minute substitution. So thank you, Anjay, for doing that. Ben Perrin, law professor, author, and a former member of Stephen Harper's Prime Minister's office. And I think it's important to invite him for reasons that will become apparent in the next little while. Matt Johnson, health promoter, Safe Consumption Services, Parkdale Queen West Community Health Center, and Elaine Hyshka, who's an associate professor and Canada Research Chair at the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. So, you know me, I'm the host, but of course I always have shit to say, and I'm going to set the context for you. Today we are talking about safe supply and tools for change, tools for policy change. So let's look at where the policy is right now. It's in the dumps. Okay, that's my personal opinion. That we have, as a drug user movement, long argued for this, actually for perhaps 20 years. And the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs very helpfully in 2019 coined the phrase safe supply to mean whatever we're doing right now, whatever we're wired to, whatever we use recreationally, that we should be able to get the exact same drug, but a pharmaceutical version that is of known constituents and potency. That's it. Not that it should be a lesser or safer or like a safer mode of ingestion, or that you should use it under witness, just as easy as if you're going to the drug dealer. That's it. Just a swap for the dangerous unknown street thing to the known safer pharmaceutical thing. That was the concept that CAPUD and the whole movement were fighting for, including my group, the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, that I have been an organizer with for a long time. And I say that the policy landscape is in the dumps for two reasons. One, we haven't done it yet. So despite what you may see on TV, safe supply does not exist in a meaningful, mass, accessible way. There are pilot projects. There are brave people, some of whom are in our audience, who've been prescribing for a long time, but we haven't really achieved what is necessary to reverse the mass deaths, because this is the only thing that will, by the way. I know this because that's the reason why I'm alive, is because of safe supply substitution. And I tried all the other things. I tried to go to AA and to KIC and to abstinence and all that stuff. took me years just to get over to methadone and away from injecting heroin. So I never got to abstinence. So, I mean, we need something that doesn't take years. We need something that's going to work this afternoon, because that's when you could die. And this is something that does work in the afternoon. So unfortunately, the policy space is bad because governments have not seriously embraced this. They've allowed little studies and pilot projects, and a few doctors have been brave. But I mean, there's 100,000 daily drug users like me in British Columbia, and maybe 4 or 5% of us have been able to access a program where you can get hydromorphone or Dilaudid. And that's sort of like a distant cousin. And that's a very small amount. In other places in the country, it's even smaller, it's even less. And that doesn't include the recreational users who are just as likely as us to die from overdose. So that's what the governments are doing. The government of British Columbia, the federal Liberal government. Things are worse in places like Alberta, where they've had a war against this stuff. There's places where this is just not even thought of. So that one of the best places for this is British Columbia, where I'm saying it's an anemic dribble of a cousin to Safe Supply, not even Safe Supply. That's what the governments are doing. But this year and in the last year, we've seen rising opposition to Safe Supply. And so when we think about tools for policy change, to me, that means expanding Safe Supply such that it can take those massive overdose numbers that we keep seeing every week in different jurisdictions and push them way down. That takes a mass program that everyone can access who needs it. But unfortunately, the right has decided no. So journalists, media commentators, politicians at the provincial, at the municipal level, and at the federal level have all started finding each other and organizing a backlash, organizing a moral panic around particularly hydromorphone, Dilaudid, around the idea of Safe Supply, around the idea of decriminalization. And it's got a new vibe to it, but it's actually very old drug war activity. It's that the only thing that's going to solve this is abstinence-based recovery or cops. And so we get probably the most progressive premier in the country, David Eby, here in British Columbia, is contemplating mandatory treatment. So being able to lock people up. They're having a review to go and see, do they really want to do the little Safe Supply that they're doing? And the loudest voices in this policy space are now those on the right. Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Here's a hint. This is a little bit why the insight that we hope to get from Ben Perrin here with his experience with the Conservative Party under Harper. Pierre Poilievre served as a cabinet minister under the Harper regime. The Harper regime fundraised on fears about safe injection sites. They did everything they could to shut down the one that existed at the time that they came into power as a minority government. And we had to fight them. But the fight was to a standstill. It was just to allow the status quo to continue. We weren't able to expand. Pierre Poilievre has gone further than that. He's put a motion in the House of Commons telling us exactly what he wants to do. He wants to defund all of the Safe Supply programs and put it entirely and only into abstinence-based recovery. And we've seen, provincial and provincial counterparts saying the same sorts of things, even earlier than Pierre Poilievre in Alberta. And we've seen municipal politicians leading the backlash, calling for increased criminalization against people without housing, calling for more police to be hired, bigger police budgets. And that's sort of the main answer. That is the right's main answer. And they're pushing very hard on it. The right are campaigning and being aggressive about it. Whereas the government, the people in the political center, the government of the Liberal Party of Canada and the NDP Party of British Columbia, they're being quite quiet. They're being quite back-footed about it. We heard the federal addiction minister, Caroline Bennett, arguing in defense in the House of Commons. And that's probably the loudest thing we've heard, but really the right have the ascendancy. So when we figure out what are the policy tools for changing it, number one is we have to defend the anemic gains that we've got. I've been here before. We had to defend the first safe injection site in Canada, even though that's not the vision that we were looking for. We had a more expansive vision, the drug user movement. What we got was sort of like a half measure from the state, and then it got attacked, and it was up to us to defend it. This is going to be the same thing. So we need to defend it. We cannot let the right control the agenda, control the policy space on Safe Supply. The second thing that we need to do is we need to convince whatever government's in power, that we have to expand to a full, easily accessible, low barrier, safe supply program. And this is, to me, on the way to finally tearing up the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act and getting rid of the drug war altogether. Now, this sounds like an ambitious agenda. And the way that I know that we do it is the way that every policy reform has been won in this country so far has been through social movements, organized in the streets, led by drug users with allies, like such as, the parents and the people in Mom Stop the Harm, such as a lot of people who are on the call, such as people who provide services to drug users. It is a coalition. It is a massive movement of people that twist the government's arm, that raise the political costs on the government of the status quo. That's what gets it. Unfortunately, the right also knows that. So with that in mind, I think we should divide up the discussion here into three big components. The past. Where have we been? Where did all this come from? Like, for example, I talked about the history of drug policy reform and how civil disobedience and being in the streets has led to that, has led to these changes. We want to talk about the present, how this backlash is shaping what's possible now. And then we want to talk about the future. How do we get to a place where people like me, other people on this call, other people in this meeting aren't risking death, aren't going to funerals every other week or every week? So past, present, and future, we start with the past. And I want to start with, I think we always should hear from our moms first. So I want to start with Leslie McBain. And Leslie, can you tell us a little bit about how you think we got here?
Thanks, Garth. I can tell about how we got here. Mom Stop the Harm got here. And I think that tells a story in and of itself. I got here because I lost my only child, my beautiful son, Jordan, in 2014 to drug harms. And so I know why we as Mom Stop the Harm are here. My son, Jordan, Petra's son, Danny, and Lorna's son, Alex, all died of drug harms between 2014 and 2016. We were very, very angry on the surface and totally grief-stricken inside. Back then, it was fentanyl, it was lack of mental health and services, and a lack of safer supply. Does this sound familiar? Well, nothing effectively has changed. Well, what has changed is it has become worse. So we rose like mother bears coming out of a cave when a cub has been taken. We were so angry and we were so committed to make sure that no one else ever felt this grief. And that was pretty ambitious, but that's sort of been our goal for the last 7 years. Someone, it may have been Garth, who said, "Don't fuck with the moms." And someone sent me a T-shirt actually with that on it, and I don't wear it to the supermarket. Let's just say it has a specific place in my life. We created an organization. We had a name, Mom Stop the Harm. We had a website. We had a Facebook page, and somehow we rose from 3 of us to over 3,000 of us now across Turtle Island. We are amazed by this. We are saddened by it, but we are also, we're also happy that people found us, and people who needed us and need us found us. We coalesced, we met, we got onto committees. Did we know what we were doing? No, but we just went anyway. In the past, we did not see it coming that the right would be seriously and effectively weaponizing stigma, using stigma for political gains. As mothers, we never wanted to be at war. We are not conversant in war or battle strategy. We leave that up to Garth. You could say we have been now conscripted into boot camp. So that is really why I'm sitting here, why we got here, how we got here. It was families experiencing death of very close loved ones, and families in total stress and anxiety about their loved ones who are still with them. So that's our past. Thanks.
Thanks, Leslie. I think I want to turn to Ben Perrin right now. And I think about the journey over the past, say, decade, 15 years, since before the overdose crisis as we know it now has sort of swept Canada. And I think, Ben, I want to ask you, what role did the Harper government play? And I'm fascinated by us having this insider knowledge. I congratulate you on your courage to have been, in the belly of the beast and to kind of come out and to write and to be very publicly critical now of the same party of which you were once a core senior leader. So can you tell me what that was like?
Yeah, thanks, Garth, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. The closest thing I can describe being a insider in a political party is that it is a cult. If you look up the definition of what a cult is, there's an esteemed leader who you cross who will have consequences. There are a set of beliefs which you ascribe to, whether or not that's why you got invited in the first place. Maybe you just like the casseroles they made, but now they've got some views that are part of their beliefs and you're signed on to that. Another core aspect is if you want to leave, you're declared a persona non grata. You're out. There's no room for friendships or things like that. So when I got involved in politics, I had a few public policy issues I was concerned about. I was concerned about things like justice and how victims of crime were being treated, and kind of carried that through. And I never thought about drug policy, even for myself independently, that is. I never thought about it, even to the point when I was a top criminal justice and public safety advisor. Why? Because you don't have to think. The party tells you what to think. The ideology is there. And in preparing for today, Garth, I did something which is, there is part of my brain which has been really turned off for the last 10 years, which is when I was in PMO and last involved in politics. Because I was thinking about this question, and I was like hitting my head against the wall. And these are just three contrasts between the world I'm in now and the world that I was in. And I hope this helps to answer your question and we can explore this a bit more. Right now, the world I'm in, as people I think can see, is I'm interested in the policy, the drug policy. What are the decisions that are made? What are their outcomes? How do we determine policy? Based on the best available evidence. What's the goal? It's to save lives. Okay, so it's policy, evidence, saving lives. Contrast that with how I used to think about these issues, and I'll say how the current conservative movement thinks about these issues. It's not about policy, it's about politics. These are completely different things. Okay? They have the same root, but they are 100% different things. It's not about evidence, it's about ideology. Okay? It's not about saving lives, it's about getting votes. I can't break it down more simple, okay? Here I'm going to end my intro here, I guess, in this question. I'm just going to read off a list of phrases that someone heavily involved in politics as a party insider will know exactly what they mean. And there's about 12 of these. A little quick experiment for anyone who's listening. If you don't know immediately what this word means, it shows that there's a whole other world that is going on, that is waging this war against people who use drugs, that you don't have a clue about, just like I had no clue about the world that each of you are in, okay? Here's a quick list. Issue framing, the base, wedge issues, red meat, micro-targeting, GoTV, the leader, not our people, policies, platforms, there's a few there for you, stakeholders and validators, and PNG. How many of you knew immediately what all of those were? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, okay? So there's a whole other world out there that is waging war against people who use drugs, and that's the language they use, and those are the core tools and concepts that they use, and I don't have time to obviously get into them all right now. So hopefully that's a helpful starting point. I'm grateful to be here. It's humbling. I appreciate that I come with a tremendous amount of baggage and accountability for the advice that I gave in the past and the advice I didn't give. And I've sort of publicly expressed that many times, but I think it's a good forum. There's over almost 200 people here to just formally again, apologize. You're not going to hear this from any of the other people involved in that movement at this point. And so let me, for things that I did and didn't do, apologize for the the role that I played in this, and I'm deeply committed to doing what I can to try to support positive change with the remaining days I have left. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. I'm sure I know there's things that we don't agree on, and there's probably other fora for that. But I really was interested to host this because part of what I'm super fascinated by is how the mechanics of the Prime Minister's office, that space between policy and politics and ideology. And I don't let the federal government off the hook now. They have also a strong Prime Minister's office that sees all of these things, safe supply programs included, through the same prism that you were talking about. And they just have a different base and a different understanding of what they can get away with, but votes still come first. So don't anyone get the idea that I'm a Liberal Party supporter or anything like that. Far from it. I think history changes because of us, not because of them. So thanks, Ben. I wanted to go on to Anjay, who is from the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs. And I think it's important as we think about our history, CAPUD has been around for a while. CAPUD came up with coined the phrase safe supply to encapsulate this idea that had been with the movement for a long time. So Anjay, how did we get here?
Well, I think, I'll speak about it in two ways. I think, first off, CAPUD, I feel, and other drug user groups have come about as a reaction to things that happened way before I was born and things that are continuing to happen. And that's either intentional choices made by our leaders to do nothing, or or choices made by our leaders to do things that impact our community. And what I'm talking about is with reference to substance use or drugs, which I am a person who uses drugs. And coming to CAPUD was a big kind of turning point in my life, because as a person who uses drugs prior to that, I kind of felt alone, helpless. I was reviving people, bringing people back from overdoses. Prior, no Good Samaritan law, no naloxone available, and it was a difficult playing field, and you kind of had to just swim and navigate it. CAPUD, started in 2011, like as Garth said. We coined the term safe supply. And what a safe supply is, as Garth mentioned, is trying to find something that is an equivalent to what we're getting on the street, but in a safe form, in known quantity, in known potency. We just don't have that. I'm presently on safe supply, and I get my Cadian and my Dilaudid, and it helps, and it's amazing, and I'm super appreciative to the prescribers and they at Parkdale, Queen West, where I go get my safe supply. They provide a whole bunch of services which I think are really great, but it took me 2.5 years to get on that program. I was on waiting list. I wrote pieces in Filter. I was at Stimulus Connect webinars and speaking about my story, and even being someone in the community who knew prescribers and all that, it was still really difficult. I know a bunch of people who want to get on safe supply, and there's a bunch of drug users who don't even know what safe supply is. Like, there's a massive hill that we have to get over, like uphill battle that we have to kind of come to terms with. And and I guess that will be part of my presentation. But that's kind of how I got here and where CAPUD's at. Thanks, Anjay.
I thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Let's go right to the belly of the beast, Alberta, and talk to Elaine Hyshka. Sorry, I'm saying it right. I don't know. I should trust my instincts. Can you tell us what you're seeing? How we got here?
Yeah, thanks, Garth. I just want to start by acknowledging, we had some pretty heavy data come out this week in Alberta, looking at really escalating death rates again after they have been declining a bit. And I just want to acknowledge the collective grief and trauma that everyone is experiencing, especially here in my home province, but across the country. And I want to acknowledge everyone on this call. I'm looking at the attendee list, and there are many really strong advocates counted amongst those attendees. And I know you're all working extremely hard and in the face of very difficult challenges, including a number of very amazing people from Alberta. So yeah, I guess I'm here because I'm the token Albertan living in the heart of some of this, where we're seeing this political backlash come from. But I think also I'm here because I have been working to advance progressive drug policy in a very conservative province for over a decade now. Back in 2015, 2016, we really started to see deaths take off, and there was a big push to treat it like an emergency and to get resources in place. In 2017, I was under the government. I was appointed as co-chair of our Emergency Response Commission, and I worked with our Chief Medical Officer of Health for 2.5 years to implement supervised consumption sites and a number of other progressive policies to reduce deaths. And then that work ended in 2019 with a change in government. And since then, I think everybody has been working very hard to try to preserve those gains and also continue to implement new solutions to save lives, even in spite of what has been challenging political climate. So I guess what I see is, I think we should acknowledge that we did make a lot of progress at the start of this emergency. There was a lot of resources that came that weren't there before that got put in place. And you know, those were not enough by any stretch, but those are important to acknowledge that we can achieve gains when we try, you know, and when the circumstances are right. I think now, though, we're in a different circumstance. Before, we had a situation where everybody did agree that this was an emergency, I think more or less. You know, maybe they didn't want to declare it under specific legislation as such, but people felt an urgency to act. And I think that the pandemic has really made people numb to death. And I think that's very horrifying, frankly, but real. You know, seeing daily death counts and just kind of being bombarded with that kind of statistics, and I think has made it harder to draw people's attention and hold their attention to drug poisonings or the toxic drug crisis. And so I think we need a new approach. You know, in addition to fighting for attention, you know, and people to help people feel the acuity of the situation, I think the other challenge is that we are seeing, you know, in the US and Canada, we did have a period there where we had some progressive gains of drug policy, and now there is almost like a backlash against that. And I was just reading an article yesterday, but man, the trends are exactly the same with the politics in the US as they are here. Like the issues are slightly different because obviously they don't have safe supply that they're fighting, but it's the same playbook. Everybody, all the conservatives across the country on the far, especially on the farther right, are operating from the same playbook and pushing to make people who use drugs the enemy and to gain political points by othering that constituency and saying that we're going to, you know, keep everyone else safe from that constituency. And we see that playing out every day here in Alberta. We are hit over the head with discourse about the dangers of people who use drugs and the need to protect communities, and just every kind of rhetorical device put in place to try to other people and make them sound like they're not part of our community when we know that's wrong. And they are certainly, you know, we are all in this together, and they are definitely like, there's no other. So I think we need to figure out how to counter that and to make people remember that we're one collective and that we have to prevent death. And so I guess I don't know how to do that. And I hope that this conversation will help us to how to unpack some of that. And I just want to thank you for the opportunity to join, and thank everyone again on this call that's doing this hard work, because I know it's really, really hard.
Thanks, Elaine. You know, I think the first step in what do we do about it is naming the enemy. And we can see the right wing coming up. I don't mind calling them the enemy because they really, underneath it all, the death of drug users doesn't bother them. And in fact, some will openly admit that that's a fine thing, you know, that they don't mind at all. And that if things seem similar in the US, sometimes the rhetoric in the US and in Canada, that's no surprise because there's a coordinated North America-wide movement called North America Recovers that had a conference in Alberta. It has a large coalition of membership. It includes a lot of Canadian organizations, Alberta organizations, private recovery house from here in New Westminster. So there are a lot of players in that. And of course, they have access to institutions that we don't, such as Parliament, such as the largest newspaper chain in the country, Post Media, who seems to have almost an editorial position against us. So just before we leave the past, I want to talk to Matt. And Matt is a health promoter at the Safe Consumption Services and the Parkdale Queen West Community Health Center, which is, this place is in Toronto. It's where a long-time friend and comrade of mine worked, Janice Warren. I known her since the 90s. Back then, we had no nice words to describe ourselves, right? Someone who, like me, who did sex work and was a person who used drugs, I didn't have either of those terms. All we had was the nasty terms. It was a terrible time. And so we really clung to each other. And Janice Warren was one of those people. She worked at Parkdale and she died at Parkdale in 2021. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about the past as you see it, how we got here?
Sure. I mean, I think this has been said before, but none of this stuff was just given to us out of the kindness of some politician's heart, right? Like, these have all been hard-won battles. And I think one of the things when you brought up post-media is in these articles, they keep talking about, these so-called experts say we should have this, or these so-called experts say we should have that. And it completely disregards the fact that all of these, safe consumption sites, needle distribution, safe supply, all of this comes out of what our community has already been doing for decades, right? The drug using community has been caring for itself. We've been caring for each other for a long, long time. And it's only when frontline workers witness this peer-to-peer kind of safety planning and recognize that this needs to be institutionalized and that it needs to be done in a way that provides safety to the people who are doing it. We've built all this stuff on the backs of people who ran shooting galleries out of their apartment and risked arrest and risked eviction. And somebody finally said, like, you shouldn't have to risk all that in order to keep your friends and your community safe. So it's not like it's some expert who isn't connected to this, who just says, well, I think we should do this because of no real good reason. This is all things that the community has been doing for a long time, and doing well. I mean, the only reason that many of us are alive is because our friends have been doing this and we've been doing this for each other. I knew Janice very well. I'm happy you spoke about her. One of the things that was so difficult about when she died is that she died on a weekend when our safe consumption site wasn't open because there was a slight glitch in our exemption materials. And so we were forced to stop being open on the weekend and close for a few weekends. And I had this bad feeling that somebody might die. And then it ended up being Janice.
That's
when we should
awful.
have been, we should have been open, right? And so often it is these things that community does and does very well, that then gets brought into institutions and done with a lot more red tape and again in a more washed, not quite as radical and not quite as effective way. I can only really speak to Ontario. We have had a lot of success with drug user organizing. We managed to get not the very, very beginning of the conversation about safe consumption sites, but we managed to get safe consumption sites fast-tracked and then have a lot of them opened really, really quickly because we opened one in a park and they really didn't like that.
You didn't wait for permission, right? This is
No.
I think a thing to underline about how we got here. Our history is that, and I like what you said, that nothing's been handed to us. Yep. Every time we have to arm twist, break the law, get in the streets, do it all ourselves.
Yeah. And same thing when our current premier, who's very right-wing, got in, he wanted to shut all the sites down. And so we, again, just opened sites in the park and said, if you shut them down, we'll just operate them in public spaces the way you don't want them done. And so he ended up washing his hands of it and saying, fine, I don't care. Mm-hmm. But I think, we did get a lot of wins in a short period of time and we're facing this backlash. But I think there's another side of that, which is that we're facing a huge amount of burnout. Like, we're affected by COVID as well. We've also been dealing with, in Ontario, it's more since kind of 2016 that the fentanyl hit, but we're going on 6-7 years of an overdose epidemic. And so, almost my entire community is dead. It's really hard to maintain the energy to keep fighting, right? Sometimes that fight, that anger and that passion can rally you up and give you energy. But sometimes just being in this world, and witnessing this much grief and loss, it can be really, really hard to keep fighting that battle. And then coming out of COVID, same thing, where that has had serious impacts on people's mental health. And so we definitely need community members. We definitely need people who use drugs to continue standing up and continue fighting. But I really think we need the allies as well, and the people who aren't as affected personally to come out and help, because it can't always be put on us to save our own lives. We need other people to come out and help support us as well.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for remembering Janice.
Thanks.
I think that's a good point to remember, is that when we look at the right, and I described all of the players that are on the right and how they've got a lot of momentum, we kind of know who we are. We're drug users in our organizations, and we're allies, like people on this call and in the audience. And we have to build that allyship. We have to build that movement out. But the truth of it is that over the last 5 or 10 years, we have lost a whole layer of our leadership is dead. We have been mourning and holding memorials almost every week at Vandu. We have been in Toronto and Alberta and Vancouver. We've been facing street sweeps and tent encampment evictions and just like constant crises, the arrival of benzo dope or trank dope or whatever, constant crises, which mean we're always responding to the next crisis. We've also faced the state recognizing that we're a force to be reckoned with. So when that happens, the NGOification of movements isn't unique to drug users, but when states are faced with a social movement that they finally have to contend with and take seriously, sometimes they try to use funding as a way to make us compete with each other, or try and make the agenda owned. Like government takes a lot more control over an agenda when they provide funding, when they fund certain activities and certain not. So our agenda has been in the hands of crises and sometimes the government. Right. And we do need to get funded. We do need these things. But I think to cap off this history section, we also have to remember the times when we didn't have that. The right wants to take us back 10 or 20 years. And I remember the tactics from back then, when we didn't have funding, when there was no little corner of the policy world or the public space where we were accepted and could discuss things, when we were just outsiders, when we were universally despised. And the right wants to take us back there. And it's not just the right. The right has enough gravity and momentum that they're carrying people in the middle along with them. So I can see the government of British Columbia thinking about mandatory recovery and not talking about safe supply anymore. And they are a government of the political center or even center left. So now that we turn to the present and future, I'm going to compress these two topics into one because, well, they're connected temporally, and also we only got 20 minutes before we're all going to have Q&A. So for those of you who just are chill and fly by the seat of your pants, you're in good. And if you prepared comments and you were ready to read them out, I am sorry. It's going to fuck you up. But I will leave those of you who I think might have prepared comments to later on in this. So given where we are, where do we need to go? And let me start with Anjay and give the CAPUD perspective on this question. Where do we need to go, Anjay?
Well, we need community-based models, as Matt was kind of alluding to. Nothing's given to us. I was perusing the internet the other day and typed in the word safe supply, and as you mentioned, Garth, it's just a lot of bad stuff. It's not like, oh, hey, safe supply is great. Come is what you see. You see like a lot of really scary articles and people really questioning the validity of even the medical safe supply model, when really what we need is to push things in the other direction, to really come together, build coalitions with people who use drugs and other allies, and as was also mentioned, funding is used as a tool of control and as a tool of division, and like right now is a really, really, really crucial time. that, you know, for people who want to actually get a substance, if you want to get prescribed fentanyl as a person using fentanyl, like it's really, really hard. And even to get on safe supply is pretty hard. And then, you know, if you're not in a place like Vancouver or Toronto or an urban center, if you get to the rural areas, it's like downright near impossible. So yeah, there's like a lot of scaling up that needs to happen. There's a lot of community action that needs to happen, but the opposition is real. And yeah, like we just need to, you know, whether it's on the streets or online or however in whatever capacity we can, we need to come together and have our voices heard by these people, because no one's going to do it for us. So thanks.
Thanks, Sanjay. You know, the future, as I see it, is this is not just a sudden thing we should be surprised at that will pass quickly. This backlash, this moral panic has been brewing since at least I started to identify it in late 2021. So it's been going. It's going to go at least until the next federal election, which could happen anytime, but is scheduled for October of 2025. So if you think about it, between now and October 2025, you're going to see Pierre Poilievre and people on the right, because he has a movement also behind him. This includes the people who occupied Ottawa at the beginning of 2022, you know, the truckers, the anti-vax, all this bullshit. So, you know, Ben Perrin, given your knowledge of how this cult operates, so the cult of the political party operates, what can we expect to see from them? Can you give us any clues as to what our opposition is going to be doing and thinking over the next 2 years or so?
So yes, this is all just speculation because I don't actually talk to any of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just to be clear on that. So you're already seeing it. So what you're seeing is a snowball rolling down a mountain is the best analogy I can think of. So first it's picked safe supply because it's a very easy, attractive wedge issue, right? So it's not called that by the right. It's called taxpayer funded hard drugs for addicts. That's all in air quotes. If anyone's not listening, They use that stigmatizing language, and that's from Harper's era. But what's happening now, which I do think I'll say is new and different currently, but actually has its roots back in like Victorian England, when we saw the expansion of policing and mass incarceration to begin with, was all of these other issues being embedded with it. And Elaine referred to this a little bit ago. So it's not just about people dying in substance use and a quote unquote opioid crisis anymore. That's done. That's not the narrative. This is about, you're not safe in your community. This is about, here's the list. It's about drug use. It's about crime. It's about stranger attacks. Remember that from a while ago? It's about mental illness and instability. And it's about tents, and it's about encampments, and it's about poor people. And it's all being put together in one grab all. And the answer to it, we're being told, is what I would describe as tough on crime 2.0, more police, more stricter bail, longer prison sentences, expansion of incarceration. So, and we are those people who are opposed to those policies are 100% not in the game. I'm going to just give a few quick examples of this. 1.2 million views on YouTube for a certain documentary I won't publicize. I haven't even watched it. Okay. 1.2 million. I don't know about you, Garth, how many people listen to your incredible podcast, but I don't think it's 1.2 million.
Many. No.
Okay. And Elaine, you and I are right. 1.2 million people have never done anything with any of my work. So that's a void. So someone asked in the chat, is there an alternative to that film? No, there isn't. Okay. So, and people watch and lead that. We're also not given the chance to get a 10,000 word op-ed in a national paper. It's never happened before.
On any subject. Yeah.
No, ever. It has never in the history of journalism or Canadian newspaper or in the world, I would say. If it's happened, send it to me. It hasn't happened. So it's all about content and filling the content pipeline. So, I do fact checking. People see that. That has very limited to no effectiveness. Okay. And in fact, in some cases, it can make things worse. So I'm mindful of that. And I'm very careful how I do it. So my approach go forward, I can just share that and then I'll end, is I'm very keen on getting out evidence-based effective content and doing my part of that. And so I've got a new book coming out, which is called Indictment, the Criminal Justice System on Trial. All the proceeds are being donated to charities. In case people are worried about me shilling on a book, it's all going to them. The two purposes of that book are to debunk tough on crime and this growing movement to bring that back, and to show that there are better ways. People need to see that there are different and better ways than cops in prison. They haven't heard that yet, and they need to hear those ideas. So that's what I'll be sharing about. I think we have some great podcasts like Garth's. We're doing a podcast for the book. We have a huge gap in terms of like video. I mean, and people consume video content, and also narrative. Our narrative has to be based on facts and truth. Their narrative gets to be based on whatever they want because they lie. So we have a harder job, but we need to do a better job than just saying, but the evidence says this, but here's another study, but you're wrong. That's not getting us where we need to be. So I haven't given up, and no one here has, but I think it's a good sobering moment as we go into summer to think about how we can work together and expand this group, quite frankly, way beyond the people who are here, even attending today, to a much broader coalition. So look forward to seeing what happens. Thanks.
I think that content is really something to watch too, because, Pierre Poilievre has a video that came out in November. It's called Everything Feels Broken. And it's filmed down in Crab Park with a tent encampment as a background, as a backdrop, like as if it's a set deck, not that he talked to the people. And he gives a few fundamental talking points to the right wing there. He says this woke governments, watch out for that if you hear that word, woke governments like the NDP government in BC and like Trudeau's government are giving addicts government-funded dope, right? And that's causing the overdose crisis. So this is completely ass backwards. Said flooding the streets. First lie, it's not causing the overdose crisis. Second lie, there's no flood. There's a little dribble. He goes on like this, but the starting point is true. Everything does feel broken. And this is a classic thing, is that he will say things that other politicians don't say. Like politicians in the center are like, oh, everything's not broken. Everything's pretty good. We just have to make a few tweaks. Everything is fucked. But then he switches, instead of saying, here's why it's fucked, because the grocery store is like, your grocery bills are $20 more every time you set foot in there, that your rents are going up. And so it's $2,500 a month to live in Vancouver. So you feel like frightened. Regular rank and file people, voters, feel frightened to, are they going to lose their housing? Are they not going to be able to afford food? What's their job situation like? Everything feels broken. Everything feels precarious. But then he blames it on that old, scapegoat of the unhoused, mentally ill drug user. So I think that's something to watch for. And since the belly of that kind of propaganda comes from Alberta, or it traditionally has anyway, and that is where someone who's very high up in the recovery movement is actually the chief of staff to the premier of Alberta, an incredibly high position. No government is going to put me as the chief of staff to anybody. And I like to think that, I'm a member of our movement in the same way as that guy's a member of our opposing movement. Elaine, can you tell us about where we need to go in the future in Alberta?
I think I can, but I just want to make clear first that I am participating here today, and also in general as someone that studies drug policy, and also as a public health academic, I feel morally compelled to make sure that evidence informs emergency response to the situation. And so I try to eschew politics as much as I can in the large P, capital P way. I'm nonpartisan. I'm from Alberta. Most of my friends, well, maybe not in Edmonton, but we have a lot of conservative people here that are in my family, and I personally think that any party can advance evidence-based solutions, and all of them have rationale to support those. And I just wanted to highlight, when you say that the right is the enemy, I would disagree. I don't think it's the right in the sense of people who identify as right on the political spectrum. I think it's the right-wing political class. And I think that's a very distinct body. Like, if you think about the general population in Alberta and, in Edmonton and in Calgary, we did some, most people are in the center. Even in the most conservative province in Canada, most people are generally pretty moderate. And we do have more people that identify as far right here, but generally speaking, most of the electorate is actually in the center. And my friend Jared Wesley, who's a political science prof at U of A, has done a ton of research and focus groups looking at how people see themselves. And those that identify as conservative here, most of their social values and views in general are pretty moderate. And when you talk to them about drug poisoning or overdose or the opioid crisis, if that's the frame, even in rural communities, people know people struggling, and they know people they have died. And most people are very open-minded to talking about this from a place of compassion. And I just want to make that point. And I also just want to drive that home by saying, we actually did some public opinion polling back in 2021 when Jason Kenney's government was making a big deal about safer supply. And we did public opinion polling in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And if you look at our results, you can see that even amongst people who identify as far right, about 50% support the idea of safer supply. And
I think this is a really good point to underline. And I'm glad you came back to it, right? Because I am talking about the people who are leading, not just the people who are voting. And I have a lot of compassion for people who basically, they don't have time to become drug policy nerds like us, right? They're dropping off their kids, they're going to work. They just catch the headlines of it. And, you know, if you've been watching it, it sounds like governments talk like, at least the government of BC and sort of the federal liberals, they talk like they've done everything they can. They've done this great job that they should get patted on the back of implementing safe supply. They've stolen our word. It comes out of their mouth and they act like anybody can get it who needs it. They just have to put up their hand. And they also make it sound like harm reduction has been fully implemented and is standardized and institutionalized across the country. And so people out there who don't have time to get into the weeds must think, okay, you guys have done safe supply for a bunch of years and harm reduction for a bunch of years, and the deaths are worse than ever. It must not be working. And I have a lot of sympathy for people who think that, you know, because really the political center has done a very poor job. They've been continuing to run the drug war, meanwhile patting themselves on the back for shit that they actually haven't done, thereby making us targets. So there's plenty of blame to go around. But the people who know the truth on the right, who know what's actually going on and choose our deaths, yeah, I declare them to be our enemy for sure.
Yeah, and so that's the main point I wanted to make. And I think, you know, it's certainly that's you just described the narrative that we're up against in the province here. You know, we say like, and it's true, Alberta literally does not have an emergency response plan for this issue. Like we used to have one back in 2019 and that is done. And I think it might be the same in Ontario. I don't know what the situation is BC, but yeah. And then the first thing people say is like, well, BC doesn't have a plan, or, you know, BC is not doing well, as though I'm somehow holding up BC as, you know, BC is doing equally poorly.
Yeah.
Like look at the statistics, you know,
We have
and
more
so I
in
think that is
common
a
than
big
we have
narrative
separating us.
Totally. I think it's a total rhetorical device that's used to distract by comparing our two provinces. They're both failing. People continue to die. Much more is needed. And full story.
So yeah, thanks. And you know, I guess I should have been a little more precise about what I was talking about when I meant the movement on the right. You know, the movement on the right is like, it's like a social movement. It's like organizations that are networked together, like the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. There's a lot of people who just, you know, vote once every 4 years and they're not a part of that movement. They're just, you know, they're just seeing the options and choosing. I think for them, we have to win them over. We have to show them what the conservative agenda really means. And at the same time, we have to show them the failures of the political center, the Trudeaus and that too, because any government who supports the drug war is my enemy. I mean, any government who doesn't care whether I live or die, they've got to be on my shit list. And the shit list is long and has an order to it. But people who have no power in the political system, who are just trying to survive, you know, I don't harbor any ill will to them. And what I will say about Pierre Poilievre is he's been willing to acknowledge that everything is broken. And he's been willing to say, I want to bring our people home. Now, I don't know whether that's rhetorical or whatever, but he's willing to take the political gamble to claim us, to say we are his people. I don't think this is really true, but to say that in front of all the cameras and everything like that is something that no other political party has ever done. No other political party has said they are our people. And so probably Ben would know better. It sounds like it's a rhetorical device, but even to not blame us, but to say that they want to bring us home is an interesting turn of rhetoric that we should watch out for. But it's also interesting that they are the first party that's bothered to try. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to go on. Leslie, can you tell us where we should be heading?
Well, I was more prepared to tell because of the format.
I gave you all this time, Mom. Gave you all this time to revise.
Yeah. Well, I was listening. I was learning.
Damn it!
I just want to say that what we are doing as Mom Stop the Harm, because we do have a large membership, is we are doing all kinds of educational webinars and talks with amazing people such as yourself, Garth, and I'll just drop a few names here. Paxton Bach here in BC, Donald McPherson, Garth, Kevin Hollett, Jeremy Calicum, Maya Salovitz, Johan Hari, Travis Lupik, Jennifer Charlesworth. So we are educating our moms and families on what is really going on, what the fight looks like, and so that they may go out into their communities and be on the front lines with Matt and folks, that are doing the work and know really what's going on. We do that. The other thing in the present is that I went to Ottawa a few weeks ago. And I was invited by Elizabeth May and Gord Johns, who's an MP here in BC. And I actually was able to meet with person to person and sometimes with a few moms as my posse. Elizabeth May, Gord Johns, Jagmeet Singh, Duclos, Minister of Health, Carolyn Bennett. It was hot and full and exhausting. Did we move the dial? Probably not, because I think we were preaching to the choir. But we cited evidence and we told our stories. And this we feel is the way that we can strengthen those who may be in a position to make some decisions. I also wrote 3 letters to Pierre Poilievre in the weeks leading up to coming to Ottawa, saying, that I would be there and I'd be happy to meet with him to discuss, and, really, mom-like letters, and knowing that I wasn't going to get a response. And of course I did not. When I did get there, though, the media loved this, that the moms respectfully asked for a meeting with Pierre Poilievre to discuss, and he refused to even reply. So they were like a dog with a bone with that. So that I thought that was a really good step. It was kind of unintended, but it kind of worked.
Nice.
And I repeated often that his defeated motion to defund safe supply only serves organized crime, and it increases death and harm for people who use drugs.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. And the future, we have to listen to the experts. We have to search out our research, the research that we know is good and solid. And we know some of the places, and there'll be links for this. And yeah, a lot of what I've written doesn't work now, but one of the ironies of life, I just want to get this in, and this straddles the past, the present, and the future, is Mom Stop the Harm received federal and provincial grants to build and run support groups for those families, mostly moms, healing hearts for those who had lost loved ones, usually their offspring, their sons and daughters, and then holding hope for those who had their loved ones still with them. We've done a good job by our own report card and also by the government's report cards. So we're grateful for the funding, and these groups are helping a lot of families. But the irony of life is we wouldn't need these support groups. We wouldn't need to be supporting families in grief. We wouldn't need to be supporting people with their loved ones out there in the toxic drug market if the government would fucking do what is the actual compassionate, right, and humane thing to do. So what I hope is the future brings truth to truth. And I hope it brings better education for kids and mental health awareness. And I hope the future brings the end of the war on drugs. And in the future, I hope that no one else loses a child to a preventable cause like this.
Thanks, Mom. Thanks always, Leslie. I think about your trip to Ottawa, and I'm not surprised that Pierre Poilievre didn't show up.
No.
And you said that a lot of the other meetings were speaking to the choir. I think there's something we could ask the choir to do. Mm-hmm. Right now, the Trudeau Liberals are in a minority government position, but they have this, this agreement with the NDP that they're all going to work together on some stuff in order to keep them in power. It's called a supply and confidence agreement. And there's a few things like the NDP has said, look, Liberals, if you want us to keep you in government, you're going to have to make some progress on pharmacy, covering pharmaceuticals as part of health coverage, and dental. Now, if the NDP really cares about us, we should ask them to include in that agreement our issues. So to keep the government in power, the NDP should say, we want to see real progress on safe supply. So I think there are things we can ask of people who are closer to our perspective. And people probably think I'm hard on everybody, but that's true. I understand the job that they're all doing is difficult. The last person we got to talk to about the future, and before we go to Q&A, is Matt. Matt, could you tell us from your view on the front lines there, what does the future holding for us?
I don't know. It's really hard to say. I'm trying to maintain some optimism. Things are looking potentially kind of pretty dark, or there's at least a strong possibility of things going that way. I think it was interesting what Elaine said about how most people who identify as right wing are or half and half are on board with safe supply, but they'll still maybe vote conservative. And I think maybe we need to have more like the right does, like maybe focus less on facts and more on feelings, and call people out more harshly and be like, you might be voting for these people because you want tax breaks, but your tax breaks means that this many people are going to die. So like how many lives are your tax breaks worth, and
it's a good point.
A lot of our articles supporting safe supply do come out with like numbers and experts and all these other things that I think a lot of voters just don't engage with. I think what might be more helpful is to have interviews with people who are like on safe supply, and they can talk about how it's been really, successful in their lives, or it's worked really well for them, or other people where they can talk about the feeling aspect of it that actually like wins over hearts and minds, rather than like, well, the numbers say this, which then people sometimes feel like they're being talked down to, or like that, the newspapers think they're dumb. I think we need to, this has been said before earlier in this call, but I think we need to take some of the battle tactics of the right and use them, but in a way where we're actually backed up by evidence. We're backed up by like, good ethics and good research, but also stop putting the research forward and expecting everybody to kind of read it. I really hope everybody talks more harshly about this, about like just the facts about, the people who implement these policies, in my mind, are murderers. They're responsible for thousands of deaths. Normally we would call those people war criminals or something like that. And we don't. And I think we're kind of missing the mark there too.
I think that's a really good point. Let's think of a tactic, and then we'll zoom out to the strategy. Tactic on how we communicate is really important. And we have known this on Crackdown since the very first episode, that when I started talking to people at Van Du about making a documentary radio series, we thought it should be like us. Drug users are always waiting. We're waiting in the methadone clinic. We're waiting to, serve our 3 months for a breached condition. We're waiting at the probation office. We're waiting for the re-up. We're just always fucking waiting. It's actually so fucking boring sometimes to be a drug user. And when we're waiting together, we often swap stories. And so sometimes people get to be really good storytellers, really funny storytellers, right? I remember I was in jail when I was 19 with this guy. His name was Gizmo, and he was just the best storyteller about us, other people, everything. And that was his currency in jail. No one fucked with him because they knew he was a great, funny storyteller. And so we actually use that in Crackdown as the way that we organize the plot. We introduce you to a character and use narrative tension so that you want to keep listening. What happens next? What happens next? And then we introduce the academics. Then we introduce the statistics, because we've already bought people's attention with a good story that's rooted in people's feelings. If you want to hear something like that on this topic, please listen to a recent episode called Drugstore Cowboy. And that talks about diversion of Dilaudid, which is a big talking point of the right. And we take it head on. We talk about diversion, that yes, it happens. Here's why, here's what it means. But we talk about this guy Pockets and why he does it and why he doesn't do it. And so please listen to that and think about how you can use that in your own communications. Because there's a lot of things we could do better as Crackdown, but that's one of them that I think we do pretty well. Also, we have an episode coming out in the next within the next week that's going to be about the backlash. That just explains all the stuff that we've talked about on this call, what its roots are, what it feels like, where it's going. So watch out for that. On the bigger strategic question, people are thinking, what can we do? We need to form a large coalition, like a big social movement. And I don't mean something with an elected board and all the bureaucratic infrastructure and funding. I just mean a way that we can all march together and support each other, so that when those monthly coroner reports come, that we can all sit together on and put our names on each other's press releases, that we can all back each other up in our actions. Right now, I'm coordinating this for the Vancouver area network of drug users. If you're in Vancouver on Saturday, July the 1st, 2:00, please come by. We're just having a meeting it's an emergency general meeting on what to do about the backlash. We're going to be holding them every Saturday from now until Pierre Poilievre is prime minister or is defeated. So please feel free to come and join us. We're going to work on a Zoom. We don't have it yet.
Wait, Garth,
Sorry,
could I add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, certainly where harm reduction came from was a coming together of a whole bunch of different disparate social movements, the HIV world, the anti-incarceral world, the anti-racist world. And I think over time, we've kind of like siloed out, and certainly with COVID, we've siloed out. So earlier, that op-ed, the longest op-ed that's ever been allowed to be printed in any newspaper by the Post, the person who wrote that op-ed recently had a photo essay of theirs up in a very prominent place at Toronto Pride. And it really kind of bummed me out that at this other beautiful event, this person who to me is kind of preaching hate is being allowed to is given such a large platform. And I think another way forward is to de-silo and to like recognize that like these are issues that affect a lot of different social movements. And so we need to reach out to
absolutely
Black Lives Matter. We need to reach out to like anti-incarceral movements, and then that means that we need to go to their stuff as well.
Yep.
And recognize 100%. Those commonalities, and that if we're really going to win this, we have to win it on all these fronts and not just about the drug, not just drugs, right?
100%. Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's a great segue into the question and answer period that Rebecca is going to steer for us. So let's jump in. I'm sure that we have some in the queue, or Rebecca, is there some housekeeping items that you wanted to deal with first, like the survey?
Thanks so much, Garth. Very quick, we're going to put a poll up. If you could just take a minute and do the quick poll on your screen. That's really helpful for us for our stats, and also to know where we need to do some outreach and things like that. Okay, this is such a great conversation. So let's just keep it going while people are doing the poll. One of the questions that's come up here is from someone saying, I'm curious to hear about authentic citizenship engagement practices in public policy development relating to safer supply. How can we build competencies within public policy professionals, politicians, to create space for meaningful advocacy, community consultation, and genuinely consider our inputs rooted in evidence as democratic tools for decision making? So that's a big, long question. You can see by CS. Anyone want to take a stab at that? Authentic citizenship engagement practices in public policy development.
Sorry, I don't know how to address that, but I could say that we're on the outside of public policy development, right? Like, at least I am. I've never been invited to the big kids table. The closest I've been is to the core planning table set up by the province on decriminalization, where I sat as a representative of Vandu, but we weren't with the ministers and the decision makers who were actually deciding. So I've never really had the inside ability to sit at a policymaking table. Sometimes they set a kids table so you feel like you're having some kind of influence, but not really. Maybe others have different experiences, but I don't think I see drug users really at that nothing about us without us stage. So the stage one is just getting in the door to the proper decision-making rooms, not the ones where we're being, patted on the head like a focus group.
Can I just add quickly to that? I think the reason we don't have meaningful citizen engagement is not because we don't have like the technical strategies to do that effectively, or like we haven't studied the process, we don't have best practice. I think it's that the authentic engagement comes from being willing to give up and share power. And until you demand that, like it's not going to be authentic. And I think you know, as somebody that studies policy processes and, you know, advocates to include more people use drugs and others in policy conversations, ultimately that's the challenge. And so I think it's part of this advocacy and organizing, and it's less about, you know, do we have the right MOU or whatever. It's like we kind of need to be willing to share power, and if we are, then that's when you see actual progress made.
I have been at some of those tables, not now, but in our previous provincial government. And we did have impact on policy that we could literally talk about and then see happen. Our government changed, and then the current government doesn't care about us at all, and made that very clear. I think, you know, in the previous government, it had been that we had done a lot of direct action stuff. We had a lot of media stuff behind us, and so we had built a lot of support that seemed like a lot of voter support. So what I'd say is, like, if people who are like big blocks of wealth of voters, especially like homeowners and other people with power, tell politicians that this is important to them, they will start to build that kind of stuff, right? If you look at a lot of the, you know, liberals and people who support safe supply, they're loath to talk about it. They're trying to do it very, very quietly because they don't want to have conversations, because they're afraid that it's unpopular and people are going to be upset about it. Whereas if people voice the fact that they really do care about this, I think that they would do that, you know. But it's difficult for it to come from us. If in this climate currently, it's really difficult to come from us. I think this might be something that needs to come from allies and people who, you know, are seen as seen as voters, you know, unlike us.
Thanks, Matt. Ben, put your hand up.
Yeah, just two brief thoughts. I know we were originally going to have some talk about litigation as well. Just thought I'd mention that too. That was obviously a huge part of, you know, the Insight decision, but also the ability for patients who were part of the Salome study to continue to receive their substances afterwards. That also was really effective. So just to mention that piece. And then the other thought I had, and I know there's been huge problems with obviously how it's all kind of played out in some people's views, but you know, I remember thinking that boy, it would take a lot longer for cannabis to be legalized. At some point, it hit a tipping point, and you started seeing people who had really nothing to do with the issue, like they never talked about it, starting to say like, why are we still criminalizing this? And it started to build some momentum. I actually thought we were heading on that path with decriminalizing drugs a few years ago. It was actually starting to gather some steam, like right around when the chiefs of police put out their you know, statement and all that. And I was like, oh wow, this is starting to happen. So it can't just be the usual suspects who are speaking out on this. So that to me says outreach. That says outreach. And I think there's a place for broad social movements. Absolutely, we have to do that work. But we're also, each of us are just individuals, and there are people who I can talk to that you know, like that Matt or that Leslie or that Elaine or Garth or anyone else here, Andre could talk to. They're different. Like we're just all part of different networks, we have different contacts, with different circles that we're in. And so I have found that, you know, there's a huge power to those one-on-one conversations, and the kind of outreach that we could do if we got really serious about it is very powerful. It starts there, right? You don't build a movement just by issuing broad invitations to people. It starts with, and it always is sustained through those one-on-one pieces. And that's where I see people change their minds. When someone comes out to me and said to me the other day, can you believe that they're giving crack pipes to kids? My response was, can you believe that there's over 500 youth in BC who currently access illegal drugs? And what do you think about that? Because all they're hearing is, oh, it's safe for supply, and there's, you know, so they're like, really? Yeah, that's happening right now. You know, do you think they should be using stuff from organized crime, or maybe we should substitute that with something that we know what's in it? Well, you got a good point. Like people just don't have any other way to get information than, you know, than that. That's what changes views. It's not social media. We're all on there clicking away. How many of you have had someone say, you know, to you, like, I changed my view because your tweet today? I don't think we're wasting our time there, but it can't be the main way that we think we're going to get change.
Thanks, Ben. So there's a number of questions here. A couple of them, I think, I could pull them together to say, who are the different groups that we need to get on board here? So one person is asking about how do we get the police on board? Another question here is around, the media and how, we need to get the media and have them create the narrative. Who are the people we need? Garth?
I can take a stab at that one. Unfortunately, the police have played a role as the people who are enforcing the drug war. So they're really on the opposite side of this. They've had their budgets increased dramatically because of the drug war over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think we're not going to be able to include them and fold them into our movement. And in fact, if we do, a lot of other people won't join. Like a lot of drug users just will not feel comfortable being in a movement with police. So I think that's quite difficult. So, and I'm one of them, frankly. I've had to sit at tables with police on decrim stuff, and it's quite difficult. So we won't be able to get everybody. But the coalition of people we can work together with is very wide. So I think it would start with just all the drug user groups are together. We all get together. The groups that represent dead drug users, people who are gone, parents groups coming together, groups of people who are harm reduction workers, groups of people who are studying this. They've always been part of our movements in the past. And that's just, you think about that first core thing is people who use drugs or people who are directly connected to people who use drugs. And that would really be the leadership of the movement. But also, that overdose fatalities is a working class issue in Canada, that people who work in the trades or people who used to work in the trades make up a massive proportion of it. And so we're going to need to see the union movement of Canada take this very seriously. We've already started in British Columbia to work with a bunch of unions who've passed motions. In September, we're going to be working with some unions on contract language to get into the collective agreement. So we actually have to be on the side of workers. We got to want people to unionize their workplace, support them when they do. Labor movement historically has been an ally to a lot of different social change. Back in the day, they've been an obstacle to some of it, but I think that labor groups and community groups have worked together on a lot of different campaigns. I think also our coalition is going to have to include other people being targeted by the right. So, for example, currently the right is targeting trans and non-binary people in that same threat to public safety, threat to children way, which is complete bullshit, but harkens back to some of the worst days of homophobia when these same arguments were used. And so I think it's making common cause with them. Like the LGBTQ plus movement and us have walked together on things right from the beginning, like right from the first wave of HIV. And, other public health professionals who've been targeted because of the anti-vax bullshit would also be part of our coalition. I remember when HIV came to my world. I remember having to share syringes and using bleach. And I remember the conspiracy theories and just bullshit that was circulated around about what HIV is, how to, whether it's a hoax, this or that. And I heard the same goddamn arguments around COVID. So I think reaching out to those people too, to other marginalized people who have faced the brunt of the overdose crisis because of colonization. Indigenous groups like the BC Union of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, UBCIC, is one, for example, that stood on our side. Grand Chief Stuart Phillip lost his kid to this. So, and we've stood with them before, pushing back against negative bills that would have mandatory treatment for youth in British Columbia. So, and I think that's another place. So if you map it out like that, there's a lot of people who would be on our side, who that means that we try to support their causes. They try to support our causes. we ask them if we can go to one of their general meetings and just listen or speak for 5 minutes. And then we should encourage people to start organizing wherever they are. I always think about Ewan Thomas in Alberta, who phoned me up about 3 years ago and said, I'm just a small businessman. What the fuck should I do? And I said, start organizing where you are. We're not in the small business sector, or at least I'm not. And he started each and every, I'm not saying because of me, but I'm saying that the conversation was like, start organizing where you are, wherever you are. You might be in places where we aren't. There are gudaras, which are, houses of worship in Surrey and in British Columbia that now spend hundreds of thousands of dollars sending the bodies of their members home, like back to India and stuff like that. They're our allies too. And they're in places where we aren't traditionally organized, like in houses of worship, gudaras, mosques, churches, whatever like that. That's the kind of broad movement that we need to think about building. And that takes time, but that's the kind of movement that can defeat this right-wing backlash, this moral panic, and also can push us through to get what we actually want, which is full, accessible, safe supply, and then an end to the drug war. It's that kind of coalition that changes history, not just for us, but every group of marginalized people has used it in the past. People who are facing climate change death, they're us too. They're, 619 people died here in British Columbia in the heat dome 2 years ago. Drug users were overrepresented, but drug users who were part of organizations like Vandu and the Downtown East Side, we were underrepresented because we reached out and helped each other. We have a big coalition we can build.
Thanks, Garth. Also, just again, like the topic of this webinar, the title of this webinar is like tools for policy change, right? So when we think, Ben, you talked about litigation and things like that. I'm also wondering about the role of data. There's comments in this question and answer, the Q&A box here about where there is no data available. So one person writes, one area in Saskatchewan where we're having issues is that we don't have data. We don't even have official overdose rates from 2022. How can we advocate when we don't even use evidence or data? We have stories, but they're being silenced. So yeah, like data, evidence, how do we, we hear all the time about evidence-based policy, evidence-based practices. And
maybe that's the demand of your movement there, is demand evidence.
Elaine, you're nodding a lot there. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like, I understand the conflict between wanting to advocate for immediate action, because we need immediate action, but also wanting to say like we need data. And it can be tricky because data is certainly not going to save anybody's life, but if you don't know the scope of the problem and where it's mainly occurring, you can't act effectively. So I do think that in Alberta we had to do the same thing. We had to shame our provincial government into starting to publish the data more regularly, and we just had to keep hitting them with that message and saying like we have no idea what's going on. We the deaths are taking too long to report, and we just did that over and over, and eventually it was, I think, even started under the previous Conservative government that they started to release it more regularly. So I think also FOIP is a good tool, and I think Ben just FOIP Alberta's government, which I heard caused a lot of consternation internally, and that I think helped contribute to the release that we just got this past week. So another tool that can be used quite effectively is FOIPing, and I think we need to support each other in how we craft those asks and sharing information about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And yeah, that's really the only way, is if you keep it top of mind and talk to the media too. Say, why don't we have these numbers? Just keep it, because if it's not measured, it won't matter. And you just have to keep hammering that point home until they're essentially shamed into doing it. And like I said, FOIP everyone and try to get whatever you can.
Yeah, and go ahead, Matt.
That was actually the first battle that we fought here in the build up to opening Moss Park. Is we also didn't track our overdose numbers, and so that was the first thing that we fought for. But we actually reached out to the coroner and talked to him about it, and it turns out he was seeing all these deaths, and he knew what was going on, and he wanted to track it, but you just had to have the right legislation to be sort of put forward to start doing it. And so he was actually really helpful in figuring out exactly what we needed to ask for, and like who did we need to target, and things like that.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah. Just looking through the question and answer here, and just panel is badass. Thank you. We have a badass panel here. Really grateful for everyone that's on this call. And I think there's so much more we could talk about. I think we needed to do a part 2 of this. I'm just going to ask my team, the National Safer Supply Community Practice team, to drop in some resources for folks. We've been pulling together some evidence-based materials for people to share, some information resources. We have some longer pieces and some shorter plain language pieces that you can, talk to your neighbor about and things like that. So we've got an evidence brief, a frequently asked questions document, and some key messages documents that include some downloadable social media graphics and things like that. And I see Alex, my colleague Alex, putting them all in there. We also have a folder of resources with different program evaluations and videos, PowerPoint presentations and things like that. And as always, our website is a wealth of information. And our team is always available to help people prep for meetings if they need some research and evidence pulled together, policy briefs, things like that. Our team is here to help support that. We're also really interested, there's some comments in around narratives and getting out voices of people on safer supply and their experiences. One of the questions in the chat or in the Q&A is regarding how do we do this work and center those voices without also putting all that labor on people who are already fighting so hard on day to day. So I think that's something that we all have to grapple with as a community, is how to be good allies and carry the weight, help carry the weight of this.
Maybe that's a good future workshop too, is the tactics of this struggle, including communication tactics. I'd love to see that if you guys feel like doing a future one.
Can I just say one thing more? Let's not speak of deaths, let's speak of people who died. And when we say deaths, it's a vague concept. None of us here have died. People who have died in May. 176 people died in May in BC. Please, that's just
I really appreciate you saying that, Leslie. I think that is something, it's because it is about the language that we use. All of it, always to remember that we are talking about people, whose lives matter, or who are important in this world, and have the right to exist, and have access to the different kinds of care or whatever that they want, drugs that they want, all of it. All right, we're now over to a little past time here, so I'm just going to say a big thank you to everyone who was attending this, for giving your time and attention to us today, and a big thanks to this amazing panel. This badass.
Yeah, thanks very much to Ben, Matt, Anjay, Leslie, Rebecca, thank you. Elaine, thank you to the panel, and to all the people who came. And I usually say this thing at the end of every panel or broadcast I do. Feel free to say it with me. Stay safe and keep 6, everybody. Thanks.
Keep 6. Absolutely. Thank you.